Mr. Court's now in session, Honorable Stephen W. Boyce, Judge presiding.
Thank you. The jurors, I believe, are ready to be brought in and lined up, so we'll remain standing and we can have the jurors brought in.
All right, please. Here's our President County.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, good morning, everyone. We're on the record on case CR 22-21-1623, State of Idaho versus Chad Guy Daybell. We're continuing with evidence today, the state with its case in chief. I'll note the jurors are all present, properly seated, and all have signed their juror affirmation. So the court again extends its appreciation for following the court's instruction each day. We will continue with evidence this morning. Apologies for getting started a little bit late. We took up an evidentiary matter outside the presence of the jury and made a ruling on that. So the court will note the defendant is here present with counsel, the state's here present, and also the prosecutors. And at this time, we concluded with a witness yesterday at the end of the day. So I believe the state intends to call another witness this morning. Who will be examining the witness?
I will be, Your Honor. And based upon your ruling just a moment ago, we changed our witness order. He's coming up and he might just be a minute getting to the courtroom.
Okay, we'll go ahead and wait for the witness to appear. Who will the witness be that's going to be on direct?
Yeah, the state will call Steve Schultz.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wixom.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to just inquire of the witness, Mr. Schultz. Now that you've been placed under oath, there is a order in this case prohibiting witnesses from viewing trial testimony before they testify. I'll note that the trial is being live streamed and also open for public attendance. Mr. Schultz, have you observed or viewed any of the trial testimony in the case?
I've not viewed anything.
Okay, and have you discussed with anyone else the testimony they've given in the case?
No.
Okay, thank you for that affirmation. Mr. Wixom, you can begin your direct.
Thank you, Your Honor. Excuse me. Good morning, Mr. Schultz.
Good morning.
Could you please state and spell your full name for the record?
It's Stephen R. Schultz. Stephen, Steven, RSCHULTZ.
Thank you. And where do you live?
Springville, Utah.
And are you currently retired?
Yes, I am.
When did you retire?
I retired in 2022. Correct, yeah.
And prior to retiring, what is it that you did for a living?
I worked for 25 years with the state of Utah in the Child Support Enforcement Division. And for the last, well, from 2010 to 2022, I worked for two separate mortuaries in Springville.
And what did you do for the mortuaries?
I was a funeral director, also an embalmer, and
Did you do that for the entire
yes,
approximate 12 years?
yes,
And I want to ask, do you know Chad Daybell?
I do.
How do you know him?
Chad and I were neighbors from when we moved into the ward or into the neighborhood. That was in 2006. I'd purchased my parents' home who passed away, and Chad lived 2 doors down from me.
And when you said neighborhood, is that in Springville?
Yes, in Springville.
So approximately how many years did you live as neighbors with Mr. Daybell?
Until they left for Idaho, I believe it was 2015, at the end of the school year.
Approximately 9 years?
Yeah.
And what about the rest of his family? Did you know his wife, Tammy?
I did, yes.
And what about his children?
Yes,
How well would you say that you knew the family?
very well. We were neighbors. We attended the same church together. We had many conversations and worked together, both in the funeral industry as well as just basic good neighbors.
Would you consider yourself friends?
Yes.
You just mentioned that you worked together in the industry. What work did Chad do that you're referring to?
Chad worked for I believe both Springville and Spanish Fork cemeteries. He was the sexton. And
Could you just briefly explain what did he do as a sexton? What was his role?
as a sexton, he would take care of the cemetery. He would basically assist us in the funerals when we arrived for a graveside service. He would open and close the graves. Yeah, and so there was a lot of free time that we had to talk and a lot of share stories and stuff while the funeral burial was going on.
Thank you. And I want to draw your attention back to October 19th of 2019. Did you learn of the passing of Tammy Daybell?
I did.
How did you learn that?
The first I'd heard is that Jason William, a neighbor, contacted me and said that Tammy had passed away. And that's the first I'd heard of it. That was on a Saturday.
Did you later hear from Chad Daybell that
I
day?
did, yes. A few hours later, he called me and wanted to know if I would be willing to bring Tammy back home to Springville and take care of the services down here. And I said, be honored to.
Why did you feel that way?
Because this is a good family. The Daybells were a solid rock in our community. They, in our exact neighborhood, there were 5 members of the same family in that vicinity. And I thought highly of all of them.
You mentioned the name Jason a moment ago.
Yes,
Were you aware, was Chad acquainted with Jason?
I would hope so. He was his brother-in-law.
And why did you contact Jason to come with you?
A lot of times people would like to assist in the funeral services other than just being a silent participant. When there's an opportunity, I like to get the family members involved. And plus, it was a long drive from Springville to Rexburg and back in the same day. And I would really appreciate somebody who could also help me drive and do that whole thing. So I asked Jason. He says he would love to do that.
So did you, in fact, go to Rexburg?
Yes, we did.
What day did you do that?
We did that the following day, Sunday morning, is when we left.
About what time did you arrive in Rexburg?
It was, I want to say 9 or 10, somewhere around that, because we had to. It's a 4.5, 5 hour drive, and yeah, so we arrived about that time.
Where did you first go when you came to Idaho?
We went directly to the house.
Whose house?
To Chad's house, Chad and Tammy's house.
And when you arrived there, who was at the home?
There was obviously, of course, Chad and his oldest son, Garth, and Chad's parents.
Okay. Did you talk to Chad?
I did, yeah.
Can you explain to the jury what that conversation was, please?
Basically, I went up to approach him, gave him a hug, and said, "I am so sorry for your loss. This was a devastating blow to him, I'm sure, and as it was for me to know that someone as young as Tammy had passed away."
Did you have a conversation with him about how Tammy had passed?
I did.
What was that conversation?
I just asked him, I says, what had happened? And he said that she had been experiencing some difficulty with breathing and she went to bed that night. And then when he woke up at some time during the evening or the morning, I'm not sure when because I wasn't there, that she'd passed away. I believe he found her on the floor, and then he called Garth in to help lift his mom back into the bed. And that's what he told me.
Did he say anything to you about conversations that he had had with the coroner?
He did. I asked him who the attending physician was, and he said, well, we had the county coroner come, and the county coroner had already been there and left before we arrived. And he said the county coroner said that it appears that she may have died from an embolism. And then, yeah, she just, like I said, she left after that. I did ask Chad if they were going to do an autopsy, which is usually a case when there's not an attending physician there, but in this case, the county coroner was the person in charge at that point and made the decisions as to that she could go ahead and be embalmed.
Did Chad express to you whether or not he wanted an autopsy?
He did not want an autopsy.
Did he say that in so many words, or how did he express that
That's
to you?
pretty much it. Yeah, he says, I asked him, he says, are they going to do an autopsy to find out? Because, it might be for heredity's sake. Children might want to know how their mother passed away. And so they could, watch for symptoms, signs, stuff like that. But basically the words were, no, I do not want her to have an autopsy.
What other things do you recall discussing with Chad that morning?
I always come prepared when I'm especially going a long distance like that. Well, I'll bring the booklets that I need. I'll bring a casket book so they can pick out caskets. I try to do all that in the home so they don't have to make a secondary trip into the mortuary to make those arrangements. So most of the arrangements were done by the time we left the place, as far as choosing a casket, choosing a vault, choosing a place where they're going to be buried. Putting together a program was still left open because all things happened very quickly.
When you say very quickly, what do you mean by that?
Quickly meaning that he wanted to have the funeral service as soon as possible. And this was on a Sunday morning. And I said, well, with social media, we need to have word get around so that the people will know, so that you'll have somebody showing up at the funeral. And even announcing in the newspaper, there's deadlines to meet. And so he said he wanted to get this done just as quickly as he could. His words, not mine.
What was his proposed funeral schedule?
He wanted to do it as quickly as he could. I think there was some discussion of even possibly doing it Monday, but that was very quick. We talked about it and he said, we'll do the viewing on Monday. And we came to a reasonable conclusion that the funeral on Tuesday would probably suffice.
In your experience as a funeral director, would you say that scheduling was in the norm?
No, usually there's a 3-4 day time period between the death and the funeral. Sometimes up to a week. There have been funerals that we've not held for weeks.
And why do you typically at least have 3 or 4 days? What's the reason for that?
The preparation to get things ready for the funeral, like I said, to ascertain information for the death certificates, to get programs together and gathered, letting people know, setting up the church, putting the Relief Society in motion so that they can have the luncheon prepared. It can be done in a few couple of days, but for the most part, just to give them the opportunity.
Did you notice anything about Chad's demeanor and tone when you were interacting with him, planning the funeral arrangements?
When I was there, of course, when I gave him the hug, he was teary, and he just lost his wife. But it just seemed like there was a business-like atmosphere about it, which could be either a person's way of dealing with grief, or it could be I want to get this thing done and over with. In fact, I believe the direct words to me were, I don't want to drag this out. I don't want to drag this whole process out. I says, okay, we'll work hard and try to get it done by Tuesday.
Did he happen to articulate any reasons why he didn't want to drag it out?
No, I just wanted to, I think it was just for, because that sometimes is a long time to wait, to bury somebody, maybe 3 days, 5 days, 1 week, 10 days, whatever, before the service. He didn't want to have the hoopla of that going on.
So when you finished talking to Chad, making these arrangements, what did you do next?
At that point, when we were all finished with the arrangements, we moved over then to contact the mortician who actually picked Tammy up and did the embalming. It was Flam Funeral Home in Rexburg. I made a phone call to Mr. Flam indicating that we were finished at Chad's house and that we would like to pick Tammy up and bring her back to Springville. And so he left his church meeting that he was in attendance to there, and we met him at the mortuary, his mortuary.
Is that a normal thing when there's a deceased that needs to go to another state? Do you normally contact a local mortuary?
Yes, we call that a trade embalming, where they will do the first call when they get the first notification of death. They will go ahead and embalm and then prepare whatever they need to. And then they contact, the family will then contact a mortuary to come in, and whoever's going to be doing the service, which in this case was Chad. And he called me directly.
And I'm just going to ask the witness, could you slow down a bit?
Sure.
Our court reporter, you're talking pretty quickly. It's fine. You're articulate, but for the reporter's sake, if we could just slow down the pace.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So when you arrived at Flam's, what did you do?
We met Mr. Flam, and he directed me to the dressing room, which we call it. It's just the room outside the embalming room. And he assisted me in moving Tammy from the table over to the cot that I had brought up so that we could transport her back home.
Did you make any observations of Tammy at that point?
Just a quick glance, because I'm concerned as well that this was a sudden death. I understand that she was sick, but somebody that young is usually physically enough to overcome it. But I wasn't there during her convalescence. So
when you say that you understand she was sick, how did you have that understanding?
I talked to Jason and indicated that that's what he was told the same thing, but I actually heard that directly from Chad as well. She was not feeling well. She had a chronic cough. She was sick. Yeah.
So your understanding of her sickness was from the information provided by Chad. Is that fair?
Yes. Yes.
And you said something a moment ago I'd like you to comment more to the jury on. You said you looked at the body because you were concerned. Can you explain the concern that you had?
Whenever there's somebody who's passed away without the doctors being there to handle that, I'm always really leery of things such as, well, I don't want to have an autopsy. I don't want to drag this thing out. And there were already some red flags that I had encountered prior to her passing away, that just there was a cause of suspicion for me, and that, not suspicion, concern. I wanted to find out if she had fallen, if there was anything wrong with Tammy. Flam Funeral Home actually did an excellent job in the embalming process. And I just glanced at her just briefly, checking for any type of broken bones, marks on the face, on the neck, on the arms, on the torso, because she was there, and in the process of moving, we did see her entire body. But I saw absolutely nothing that I could determine. I'm not a medical examiner. I don't know.
So in fairness, you found nothing that you thought would be
I
suspicious.
found nothing there that would be suspicious, that would lead to my suspicions, but because of the red flags, it just, something wasn't sitting well with me.
Other than, I don't want to drag it out, I don't want an autopsy, was there anything else causing red flags for you?
The speed of the trial, the speed of the funeral.
Okay.
No,
And eventually you did transport Tammy's body back to Springville.
we did. Jason, William, and myself transferred her all the way back to Springville.
And without stating anything that Jason said, did you have a discussion with Jason about Tammy on the drive back?
I did.
What kinds of things did you bring up and say to Jason in that conversation?
In that conversation, we were both talking about how quickly things were doing it, how quickly things were happening. We both felt there was a feeling of being rushed through this whole process. And I actually turned to Jason and I said, do you think he killed her?
Was that based upon the red flags that you were
That
feeling?
was based on the red flags.
And when you arrived at the funeral home in Springville, did you do anything further with Tammy's body?
Prepared her for the family who were going to come in later Sunday night to dress her or to finish dressing her. Typically, a funeral director will clothe them up to usually for sure to have the underwear on and get the body prepped ready so that they can come in and help dress. I did most of the dressing myself on this because they only wanted really to do the makeup to make sure she looked good.
Did you re-examine her body at the Springville Funeral Home?
I did, just out of curiosity for myself, just to satisfy my curiosity as to was there anything wrong. I saw absolutely nothing wrong.
So there are at least 2 times that you looked at
Yes.
her body.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, I don't have any questions at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rickson. We'll have cross-examination next.
Judge, if I could just have a moment, please.
You may.
Morning, Mr. Schultz.
Morning.
I also have a tendency to talk quick and over talk people.
Sorry.
And it's an affliction I have. So between the two of us, this should be interesting. I'll try to slow down though. You've known Chad's family actually longer than you actually have known Chad. Is that right?
Well, yeah, no, I've known of Chad, but when I really got to know Chad was when we moved into the ward. That's when I got to know him better.
Okay.
I knew his parents from the same general area of town that we grew up in.
Okay. Okay. And do you recall that you spoke with Officer Mattingly about this case in an interview on February 19th of 2020?
Yes.
Okay. And an Officer Mattingly went over a number of topics, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about each of those
Sure.
if we could. Okay. You mentioned the name Jason William. And Jason William is related, is it Jason William?
Yes. Jason William is the husband of Samantha William, who is the sister of Tammy Daybell.
Okay. And you mentioned something about Jason, and Jason knew Chad fairly well.
I would hope so. Yes. He would been a part of their family forever.
Spoke very highly of Chad.
Correct.
Had a very high opinion of Chad. Is that right?
That is correct.
And you as well. You had mentioned in the report You thought Chad was a good guy.
Yes.
Okay. Do you still have that opinion?
Yeah, yes, I think Chad is a good person,
Okay.
but
All right.
never
Thank
mind.
you. You mentioned with Officer Mattingly that Chad had spoke to you a little bit about what happened regarding Tammy. Is that right? About the manner in which she passed away. Is that correct?
Yes, I had that conversation with Chad.
Do you recall telling Officer Mattingly that Chad said Tammy had been sick and had a coughing spasm, and he woke up, found her dead?
I'm repeating that from what Chad had told me.
Okay.
Yes.
And you mentioned that Jason William also was aware that Tammy had some medical issues as well. Is that right?
That's what so Jason had indicated to me as well.
During your discussion with Jason, there was a history of some medical problems that Tammy was experiencing. Is that correct?
I don't know if I can confirm that.
Okay. But you talked to Jason about some medical problems, correct?
Yeah, that he had heard from Chad as well.
Okay. Okay. At the time, you told Officer Mattingly that Chad found her dead beside the bed in the morning, that he called Garth to come and help out. Do you recall telling Officer Mattingly that?
Yes.
That Chad said he thought the coroner told him Tammy had an embolism?
Chad told Jason or me?
Told you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chad told me that the coroner said that she had apparently died from an embolism.
And sir, how long have you practiced the occupation that you practiced until your retirement in 2022?
About 12 years.
Okay. So you've had a significant amount of experience in viewing bodies and looking for things that you have a concern about regarding issues relating to people after they've passed. Would that be fair?
Yes.
And you understand, and please let me know that if there ever is an instant where you were to find some problem with a body, whether it was something suspicious or something of a concern, are you under a legal obligation to report that to law enforcement as part of your licensing?
Typically not, because it should have been overlooked already by either the medical examiner, the coroner, or the doctor who was the attending physician.
Okay, so you're not under any legal obligation to report if you see something suspicious,
No.
but under a moral obligation, you would report something if you found it suspicious, would you not?
You know what? I don't know if I really would report it or not, because it's already been determined by that attending person who knew that. So I don't know who I'd report it to.
Okay. So when you say that attending person, if someone passes away and there's a physician there, obviously there's no need to do an autopsy. Is that right?
Only if the medical examiner dictates it requires one.
Okay.
A lot of times the family will ask us if we want to have an autopsy done. In that case, they can bypass the medical examiner and have it done, a private autopsy done,
Okay.
just to satisfy their curiosity.
But ultimately, do you understand that a coroner is the one who makes the final decision as to whether or not there's going to be an autopsy?
Yes, because that person will then contact the family.
And it's really the coroner's obligation to go through and look at a body and to make an initial determination as to whether or not there's any foul play or anything of a concern. Would that be fair?
It's a good question, because if you'd have to trust your medical examiner or your coroner.
Right, right. And and you don't know whether or not after they make this examination, if they're under any obligation to report any foul play, do you?
I don't know what they're.
Okay.
I haven't.
But in any event, you took the time because you felt that the funeral was moving along quicker than you would like it to be.
Outside the standard norm, yes.
And when you talked about the standard norm, you mentioned that the standard norm is 3 to 4 days.
typically.
Okay, so what we were looking at is doing this in 2 days, not 3 days, right?
Yes, but there was some talk about wanting maybe to do it on a Monday.
Right.
So that, again, just certain red flags that,
But you don't know if whether or not this was a reaction to grief or whether just someone wanted to just, not, as you expressed it, the hoopla. And what do you mean by the hoopla?
getting things ready for the program, getting things ready for luncheons that need to transpire, doing things that the typical funeral would have to take some time to prepare and get people on board with you.
And in your experience, that could have two facets to it. That could either be a healing process for the family to go through that, right?
That could.
Or on the alternative, that could be an extremely emotional and difficult thing to go through that healing process. And we don't know which one we were dealing with here, right?
We do not.
Right. Okay. And according to what I'm reading in Officer Mattingly's report, you told him Chad said he didn't want to drag this thing out.
Right.
He didn't say he wanted to hide anything, did he?
No, he did not. The only thing he told me was he did not want to drag this thing out.
Okay. Okay. And then you took the time to look at the face of Tammy, is that right?
Correct.
You looked at the neck?
Yes.
You didn't see any issues of any kind of trauma or anything that would cause anything of a concern, is that right?
From my limited medical knowledge, no.
Right. And I understand that. You don't have the
Right.
expertise. But if there was a concern, there was no visible concern of any kind of a problem, is that right?
That's correct.
And then you looked at her arms as you dressed her, is that right?
Yes.
And you didn't see anything on her arms that would cause you any kind of a concern. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. And nothing on her legs that would cause you to have any concern, right?
Correct.
Okay. And nothing on any other part of her body that would make you draw any concerns for you. Would that be fair?
Correct.
Okay. You talked about Chad being a sexton. And a sexton is someone who works in the funeral business. Is that right?
Correct.
And Chad's occupation was part of it was to mow the grounds or take care of the lawn and the grounds area.
That's part of his responsibility. Yes.
And in terms of dealing with the actual grave sites, there wasn't a situation where he would actually hand dig the graves, would he?
Very few hand dig. They have a backhoe.
Right. And you
Right.
anticipated what I say. Nobody uses a shovel anymore to do that.
Correct.
That's from the 1800s.
Whenever. Yeah.
So in essence, what it is someone on your staff would take out a backhoe and use a backhoe to dig up a grave, right?
From the sexton's boss, you mean, or
Yeah, the sexton's boss would do that, or who would do that? Use the backhoe.
who would determine to use the backhoe?
Well, who would be authorized to use the backhoe when you're doing that as part of this
Well,
process?
it's typically the sexton.
Okay. So Chad might have had some experience with a backhoe, right?
He does.
Okay. Maybe not experience with using a shovel to dig graves though, right?
Correct.
Right. Now, at the time of the service, all of the kids spoke. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, all 5 kids.
Wait, one was on a mission, I believe.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. 4 kids.
4 kids.
You're right. When Chad was talking during the funeral, he broke down. He became very emotional.
He did.
Okay. Was that something that in all of the experience that you've had knowing Chad and his family, did that seem genuine?
Yes, it appeared genuine from my point of view.
And in your point of view is that you've known Chad for a good part of his life. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, not his entire life, for that 9 to 10 year period.
And
when we moved into the neighborhood.
and you worked with him for
And
a
we worked
long
with
time.
him.
And you had an opportunity, like you said, during the time that you had downtime during other people's funerals, you'd have a chance to get acquainted with each other.
Correct.
So much that you made the opinion that you think Chad's a good guy.
That yes,
Okay,
from 2000 up until 2015,
right,
I had no problems.
right. And then during the actual funeral, you had noticed that Chad and Emma were crying as well.
Yes.
Chad was doing something with his hair. He was emotional that he was tugging on his hair or something, you said?
Okay. Now this, that is part of I just barely got to see the police report maybe about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
There was either a typo or I had maybe I'd given the information talking about Chad. I may have mentioned Chad in the report. It was not Chad in who was leaning over the casket, and it was his son Garth
Okay.
who was there showing the extreme distress, emotional distress,
Right.
and Emma was there as well.
Okay. And were you aware that Garth and Tammy were extremely close?
Yes, Tammy was a good mother to all of her children.
She was particularly close with Garth, though. Do you recall?
I don't know if I could answer that she
Okay.
was one way or the other.
Okay.
Can't put a hierarchy to it.
Okay. And I appreciate that.
Okay.
You mentioned somewhere in the report that you thought of Chad as a brother. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, I did.
And again, Jason William, at the time of the death of Tammy, didn't say anything particularly negative about Chad, right?
No, in fact, he defended him with my comment about, do you think he killed her?
Right.
I said, oh, no.
Jason shared the same opinion that Chad is someone who's a good person.
Yes, he would never do that.
Okay.
According to him.
And sir, thank you. And I appreciate it.
Okay.
Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Schultz, to pick up where the defense just left off. Excuse me. Did Jason, in addition to thinking Chad is a good person, express any other thoughts about Chad at that time?
No, the thing that he mentioned was when I made that comment, his direct quote back to me is, oh, no, not Chad, never.
Have you since had conversations with Jason about this?
Yes,
Are you aware if he holds the same opinion?
he does not hold the same opinion.
And I want to go back to the question that you were asked about your opinion of Chad. You remember that question?
Yes,
And in that question, in your answer, you said effectively, Chad is a good person, but will you please explain to the jury now, what was the but? What were you wanting to say at that point?
well, the but was the red flags that have come up since Tammy was deceased, and the time of the basically the trial, the things that were being said, if you want particulars,
Certainly, if you'd like to share with the jury.
okay. Well, there's obviously the doomsday type thing that after he left Utah, he got involved in a group. You want to cut me off? What? Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought you were raising your hand.
No, sorry.
I had most of this was from Jason, who had conversations with him as well, about a date of the second coming, when that would happen. Also of the catastrophes that would follow: Deer Creek Dam breaking, Utah County being flooded, white tents in a city being developed for the chosen, the elected, the people, and those types of things are what made me have the suspicion when I went up there and found things appeared to be rushed, in my opinion. And that's why those are the red flags that I
you. You were asked a question about the norm of a funeral typically being more than 3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days on the average.
And you still felt like this situation was rushed. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Was the fact that the death had occurred on a Saturday and there was a desire to have a funeral or at least a viewing Monday, does that play into the rushed feeling?
It does, because everything's closed on the weekend. You can't get a death certificate. You can't, you got to find, we have to have time to order caskets in. We have to have time for the funeral preparation. It can be done. And in this case, I think it was done by having the funeral on Tuesday, because that gave us one full working day where we could contact the authorities that we needed to get everything in order and ready for the service.
On a Sunday, are you able to contact a newspaper to put in an obituary?
We can put one in, but it's not guaranteed that it will be in the next publication.
Was that part of your concern for the rush?
Yes.
You were asked questions about Chad's ability to use a shovel versus a backhoe.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that, we don't use shovels anymore except for when you're done burying, then you use a little bit of shovel just to kind of flatten out the blot.
Based on your background and experience with Chad, particularly that work background that you already talked about,
Right.
would it be safe to say, was Chad someone who was comfortable around death?
Oh, yeah, he would have to be. And yes, Chad wrote, he's an author. He's written books about death and dying as well. He's not squeamish about anything as far as being around a dead person. Although that must have been traumatic for him to have his wife in that position. But yeah.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, I don't have any more questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wixom. Mr. Pryor, that was narrow redirect. Do you have any requests for recross? All right, that final topic, I think, went outside the scope of direct, so you may inquire on that final topic about the books.
We'll judge on the comfortable with death as well.
Yes, that's it.
Okay. Being involved in the funeral business, such as you are also comfortable with death and viewing bodies. Is that right?
Correct.
And that goes with part of the occupation. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. And just because someone writes books doesn't necessarily mean, if Chad hadn't had his experience as a sexton, just the fact that someone writes books about topics that make some people uncomfortable doesn't mean that you're necessarily comfortable with death. Would you agree with that?
I'm not really sure. Can you rephrase that?
Sure. Just because someone writes books about topics that make people uncomfortable, does that mean that you're necessarily comfortable with death if you've had no other experience?
I think that would probably have to vary from person to person.
That's fair enough. Thank you. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
All right, that'll conclude the testimony of Mr. Schultz. Is the state intending to recall him at any point?
Your Honor, the state is not intending to recall him.
Is he under subpoena from the defense?
No, Judge, we don't intend to recall.
All right, you're released from any subpoena. Thank you for appearing and testifying this morning. You can be excused.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, the state can call its next witness.
State calls Ron Arnold, Your Honor.
solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
All right, now that the witness has been sworn, I do have a few questions before we commence with direct. Mr. Arnold, have you observed any of this trial either through online or in the courtroom since it began?
No,
Have you discussed anybody else's testimony with them that they've given in the trial?
no.
Okay, thank you for your responses there. Ms. Beatty, if you'd like to inquire on direct, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sir, could you please state your full name and then spell your last name?
Ron Arnold, Arnold,
Where do you live, sir?
in Salem, Idaho,
And what county is that in?
Fremont County.
Okay. Who are you married to?
Whitney Arnold.
How long have you lived over there in Salem?
5 years.
Okay. Do you know an
Well,
individual?
actually, I've lived there. Sorry, I've lived there since 2015. Yeah,
Fair enough. Do you know an individual named Chad Daybell?
yes,
Do you see him in the courtroom today?
yes.
Can you tell me where he's sitting and what he's wearing?
He's sitting right there. He's wearing a white shirt and tie.
And were you familiar with Tammy Daybell?
Yes,
Where did you meet Chad and Tammy Daybell?
I was in Chad and Tammy's ward.
Okay. And about
Chad was my home teacher for 3.5 years, and him and his son came in to visit us on a regular basis for that time.
which son was that?
Mark,
Okay. And did you get to know Tammy as well?
yes.
Okay. About how often did you interact with her?
Not that much, to be frank with you.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about some dates in 2019 and 2020. Is that okay?
Mhm.
Do you remember the weekend of September 21st, 2019?
Yes.
Now I'm going to back up a little bit. What's your occupation?
I'm a real estate broker in Southeast Idaho for Ron Arnold Realty.
Okay. And that weekend of September 21st of 2019, were you asked to do a real estate showing?
Yes,
Who asked you to do a real estate showing?
Chad.
Where was that real estate showing?
It was on 1800 East and about 190 North.
And that's near Salem or in Salem?
Yes. Yep.
And did you end up doing that showing for Mr. Daybell?
Yes.
Who, if anyone, came with Mr. Daybell to that showing?
I picked him up at his home and we met people there.
Who was there?
David Warwick and Melanie Gibb.
Was anybody else there?
Yes.
Who was that?
I didn't know at the time I was introduced to this person. They said his name, but I didn't remember. But looking back, it was Alex.
Alex
Cox.
who? And I apologize.
Alex Cox.
Thank you, sir. Was anybody else there?
No.
After that showing, did anybody in that party purchase the property or did anything come of it?
No.
Okay. And I'd like to talk to you about October 19th of 2019. Do you remember that day?
Yes.
What happened on October 9th of 2019?
We received a call about between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Whitney and I received a call and our bishop had informed us that Tammy had died.
What did you actually, approximately what time on the 19th did you get that call?
Sometime between 8:30 and 9 o'clock a.m.
What did you do after getting that call?
We immediately went to the house,
Whose house did you go to?
to Chad and Tammy's house.
When you got to the house, who was there?
Chad was there, obviously, and some of the kids. Everybody was in some different rooms, so I didn't take inventory, I guess.
Fair enough.
Exactly.
Did you see Chad?
Yes.
Did you speak to Chad?
Yes.
Did you notice anything about his demeanor?
He seemed distraught.
Did you speak to
mean,
him?
Yeah, I mean, I I asked him, how he was doing and, in that situation, a spouse passing away and yeah,
Did you discuss with him how Tammy had passed on that day?
not really. No,
Okay. Did you attend a memorial service for Tammy Daybell?
yes.
Do you recall when that was?
I think it was it was a Wednesday. I think the funeral that was in Springville and on a Saturday and this memorial was on a Wednesday.
Okay, so when you say there were two separate services,
Yes,
and when you say one of the services was in Springville, would that be Springville, Utah, where Tammy was from?
yes,
And you attended a service in Idaho for Tammy,
correct.
and that was a few days after her death.
Yes,
Okay. At that memorial service, did you speak to Chad?
yes.
What conversation did you have with Chad the day of Tammy's funeral in Idaho or service in Idaho?
More specifically, I mean, we visited, but he said that he wasn't going to be living at the house at the time. He didn't feel comfortable being there and was going to stay in Rexburg with a friend.
And when he said he didn't feel comfortable at the house, did you take that to mean the home that he had shared with Tammy?
Yes,
Did he say anything about leaving Idaho?
yes.
What did he tell you about that?
He said that he was going to go to Hawaii to do a biography, help a friend do a biography.
Did he identify who this friend was?
No,
Did you think that was strange?
I took it for face value. I mean, that's what Chad had been doing some, writing books and those types of things.
Okay. At some point in time, did you learn that Chad had remarried?
Yes,
At some point in time, did you meet Chad's new wife?
yes.
When was that?
It was in probably early November. Do you want me to explain the circumstances?
Well, let me just ask you a clarifying question.
Yes.
Was that in November of 2019?
Yes.
Approximately how soon after Tammy had died did you meet Chad's new wife?
That's when I met her.
In November?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember when in November?
Not specifically. We were having his kids over for family evening and a meal. And he had called me that day and said he wanted to bring his new wife over for us to meet. And I had explained that I says, well, you know that your kids are coming over to our home for supper. Why don't you just come then and eat with us? And, you can introduce us then.
And did you meet Chad's new wife that night?
Yes.
Who was that?
Lori.
Lori Vallow?
Yes.
Did you have a conversation with Chad and Lori about whether or not Lori had children?
We asked her the normal questions you'd ask somebody that you don't know, where are you from? How many kids do you have? Those kinds of things.
And do you recall what Lori's answers were or what Chad may have said?
I recall her saying that she had 7 kids.
Okay. And could that have been in reference to her and Chad's kids combined?
I was I was thinking that it was her children, not Chad's.
Okay. Did she say whether she had children living at home?
No,
Okay.
she was not specific about her children.
Okay. Were you with her the entire night or were you in other parts of the conversation that evening?
They weren't there that long, but we had a dining room area and a family room area that are kind of connected. And so everybody was kind of together,
Socializing.
socializing.
Okay. After the dinner that you had with Chad and Lori in November of 2019, when was the next time that you heard from Chad?
In March of 2020.
In what part of March of 2020 did you next hear from Chad?
It was around the 16th of March.
And how did Chad contact you or how did you come into contact with Chad?
He called me and asked if he could meet with me.
And did he tell you why when he was speaking with you on the phone?
No.
And did you meet with him that weekend in March?
Yes.
Where did you meet with him?
He came, we were just moving from our rental into our new home, and I had him meet me at our rental.
And Judge, could I have some foundation as to what year they're talking about?
Would this be, thank you, Mr. Pryor. Would this be March of 2020?
Correct.
Thank you. So you met with Mr. Daybell at your rental home.
Mhm.
And what did you do next?
He got in with me in my vehicle and we drove around and visited.
What was the first thing that you talked about with Chad Daybell?
I asked Chad the questions that probably everybody else would want to ask about where are the kids and why haven't you told anybody? And sorry.
That's okay. So let's zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
What was going on at that time that caused you to ask Chad those questions?
Lori had been incarcerated, and there was the big news and search for missing children.
Now, did you learn why Chad had wanted to meet with you that day?
Yes, eventually, yes.
And why had Chad wanted to meet with you that day?
We had previously talked about splitting his property and possibly putting another home on it. And we determined that his lot was too small. And so he wanted to know if he could put a home on it, which I thought he could. My experience thought he could probably put another home on it. And we talked about the fastest way that could be done, and that was with either a manufactured or a modular home. And we talked about some of those details.
And did he tell you why he wanted to put that home on his property at that time?
He said that he felt like he was going to need a place for him and Lori to live.
Okay. And you said that you talked to Mr. Daybell about doing that as fast as possible. Why did you talk about doing it as fast as possible?
Probably because getting into a home and having one built back then took 8 to 10 months, and you could get a manufactured home in 3 to 4 back then.
Okay. And back to the conversation that you had with Chad about where the kids were. When you asked where the kids were, whose children were you referring to?
The kids that were missing, Lori's kids.
His wife Lori's children. And what did Chad tell you about his wife Lori's children and where they were?
He looked me straight in the eye and he told me that they were okay, and when this all was going to be, when everything came out, that everything was going to be just fine.
And that was in March of 2020?
That's correct.
I have no further questions for this witness.
All right, thank you, Ms. Beatty. Mr.
Yeah,
Pryor
Judge.
Cross, yes.
Good morning, Mr. Arnold.
Good morning.
So my understanding is you mentioned that you live in the Salem, Idaho area, right?
Correct.
Been there since 2015.
Correct.
You're actively involved in your church, is that right?
Yes.
That's the LDS faith, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And
And please, Mr. Arnold, wait until the question's done before you answer. Our court reporter can only take down one at a time.
and Judge, I just realized I was going very quickly, so I'm going to also slow down.
I like him to go quickly.
Seems to be a habit with a lot of people. You mentioned that Chad was a member of your ward. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, now, from someone on the outside, describe in essence what a ward is.
A ward is a geographic area in a stake that's the geographic area inside the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay, so are there more than one stakes in a state?
Yes.
Okay, so a ward is a geographical area within the a part of, in this case, it's Eastern Idaho, is that right?
Correct.
And that would include the town of Salem, which is I've been there a couple of times. It's a small community, right?
Salem's not an incorporated town. It's a
Right.
small community. A ward has somewhere between 300 and 600 people in it. A stake has somewhere between 25 and 3,000 people in it. And it's based on numbers in a geographic area.
So if we talk about the Henry's Fork ward, we're talking about a very large geographical area.
The Henry's Fork, there is the Henry's Fork ward, but it's the Rexburg Henry's Fork stake, and it had 9 wards in it. And the ward we were in was the Salem 3rd Ward.
Okay. And having gone through Salem, what I recall about Salem is there's a church there.
Correct.
And that's kind of pretty much all of Salem. Would that be fair?
Well, there's a lot of residents there, all spread out, but yes.
Other than commercial buildings and religious facilities, Salem consists of a religious facility, right?
Yeah, there is a church house in Salem.
And it's a fundamental part of the community there. It's a drawing area where the people meet on Sundays and other times for various activities. Would that be fair?
That's correct.
And in one instance, the use of Salem Church is for some of the folks out in the Salem area, the only place that they could get internet access. Would that be fair?
No,
It's not?
no.
Okay. But the church offers free internet as part of its building there. You recall that?
The internet in our Salem building is really bad, so you don't go there to get internet.
Okay. Okay. So you mentioned in September 21 of 2019. Do you recall that?
September,
21 of 2019.
Yes.
And that was on a Sunday.
well, if the 21st is a Sunday, yes,
Okay. Well, on that particular day, you were at church with Chad that morning and
that is correct. Oh, sorry.
that's okay.
Don't hold me in contempt. I'm trying.
No, I takes a lot more than that.
Would you ask him for me too?
Okay, yes.
Thank you. You're just going to make me slow down even more now. Okay, so on September 21 of 2019, you started the day with Chad at church services. Is that right?
That's correct.
And without getting too personal, I know how long I'm in church, but how long of a process is that?
Well, it's a 2-hour block, but there's meetings for leaders before and then there's some things to do after church.
Right. So it can encompass 3, maybe even 4 hours sometimes.
Correct.
So on that particular day, although you may not have a specific recollection, Chad could have been there just before 12 o'clock that day. Would that be fair?
I can't remember, to be frank with you, what time we was meeting, because we switch every year. Our meeting times switch
Okay.
every year.
But it does run late into the morning, right?
Yes.
So that wouldn't have given Chad an opportunity on a Sunday to leave and meet with anybody else prior to you picking Chad up at his house on the 21st, right?
I was not with Chad eye-to-eye contact the whole time at church, before or during or even after.
Okay. But when you picked up Chad at his house, he was still in his church clothes, wasn't he?
He was in a white shirt and dress pants, but no tie.
Okay. But that wouldn't be unusual for what he would wear to go to church, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then at that point, you picked him up and you drove out to a piece of property that you were trying to market. Would that be fair?
Yes, which was basically less than 2 minutes from Chad's home.
Right. And I appreciate you telling me that. And at this point, Chad mentioned to you and a guy by the name of Keith about looking at that property. What was that connection with the property and a Keith?
Keith had been was somebody that I had been talking to about trying to help him find either a home or a piece of property that he could purchase and build a home on.
Okay. And then that particular piece of property is something that Keith was interested in prior to you going out there with these other folks. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. But then at some point, Chad contacted you and said he has someone who has expressed some interest in buying or at least purchasing some property in the area. Do you recall that?
Yes,
And that person was a guy by the name of David Warwick.
that's correct.
And David Warwick contacted Chad And in turn, Chad provided you with David's phone number.
That might have been how that went. I think originally we met at the property first, and then I think Chad provided the phone number for David.
Okay, but you're not sure about that.
Yeah, I can't remember the order
Okay.
of that.
It could have been the other way.
Yeah.
Okay,
The first time I met David Warwick was at that property.
right. Okay, so we're unclear as whether you had the phone number before or after.
Correct.
Okay. And then when you drove out to that property with Chad after church, did you visit any other properties?
No. I had tried to get Chad to wait till Monday, and he had indicated that they were only gonna, the people that were coming to look at it were only gonna be there Sunday, and it would only, we really needed to do that. So he pressed that. And so I reluctantly agreed to go show that property and it was actually in the afternoon.
Okay.
It was after 12 p.m.
It was later in the afternoon.
It was a little later in the
So
afternoon.
maybe church and all of the obligations with church may have run a little later.
I had been at home. Well, I had been at home when he called and says,
Okay.
will you come and show this property?
Okay. And at that point, when you showed up, there were several people there. Is that right?
The only person there was when I arrived was, and I learned this later, was Alex.
Right.
And then while we were there briefly, and David and Melanie showed up.
Okay. So from what I understand then, it's your testimony that this person, Alex, showed up first when you arrived with Chad.
I don't recall if he was there when we arrived, or he arrived after we were there, but we weren't there very long.
Okay. And this person drove in his own vehicle when he arrived there. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I assume that, yes.
It wouldn't be someplace where you'd walk from somewhere in
No,
Salem, Dakota,
no.
right? Okay. And then subsequent to that, in an absolutely separate car, the other two people who you mentioned were, who were the other two people that were there afterwards when Alex arrived?
Oh, David Warwick and Melanie Gibb.
Okay. So then in a separate car, David Warwick and Melanie Gibb arrived, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And how long were you there looking at the property?
Maybe 15 minutes.
Okay. And did David express that he had an interest in purchasing a piece of property?
He had indicated that he was either looking here or in another location to maybe do some
Okay.
developing.
And did he have did he give you the indication that he had the financial ability to do that, or is that something you looked into?
We did not talk about that at that point, at that time.
So at this point, on September 21 of 2019 in the afternoon, if I understand you correctly, you didn't look into the financial resources that David may have to purchase 88 acres. Is that right?
It was 79 acres,
Oh.
and I had not checked with him prior to that.
Oh, I was under the impression it was 88 acres. Am I mistaken?
79
79 acres? Okay. And the cost of that 79 acres would have been about how much money?
at the time, about $700,000.
Okay. But you didn't take the liberty of deciding whether or not David could afford that 700 and some odd $1,000. Is that right?
Mr. Pryor, I didn't know who was coming.
Okay. That's okay. I'm just asking.
I went there to show the property as a favor to Chad.
Right.
And so that's the first time I'd met David Warwick. Chad had mentioned that he had talked to several people that were maybe possibly looking at developing property in the area.
Okay.
And I assumed that this was one of them.
Okay.
And so if we would have kept pursuing it, obviously I would have.
Okay. And that's not as a means. I'm just getting the fact that we didn't establish whether David could even afford to buy that property is where I was going.
I guess I'm not seeing the relevance of that question to me.
Okay. Well, that's unfortunately up for the judge to decide, not for you and I to decide. You understand that, right?
I guess. No, I
Okay,
don't,
thank you.
maybe not.
Okay. And then at some point, there was an arrangement for you to meet the following day with David. Is that right?
I don't think so. I think we maybe tried, but they were leaving town. And so the only contact I had with David after that was we had a couple phone calls, follow-up phone calls. You know, are you interested? He wasn't sure. And then we didn't have any more contact after.
So you don't recall the fact that you went to Gringo's restaurant the next day with Chad with the intention to meet David Warwick on that following Monday. You don't recall that?
Actually, I don't.
Okay. Okay. And you don't recall mentioning to Chad that David had notified you that he had already left town and wasn't going to be able to meet on the Monday following.
That's good. Yeah, that could have happened that way.
Okay. So in other words, there could have been a discussion with David about going back to the property, and it could have happened that he called you and said, I'm having to get out of town and I can't meet with you on Monday. It could have happened that way?
We did not have a conversation about him returning and looking at the property before he
Okay.
left town.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you, on the 19th of 2019, you were over at Chad's house. Is that right?
What's the date?
October 19, 2019?
Yes, correct.
And when you were over there on October 19th of 2019, you're familiar with that house, right?
No, I have never been inside that house.
Oh,
I had
okay.
been in the foyer and they have a breezeway or an entryway, and that's as far as I'd ever been in that
Okay.
house.
Did you familiarize yourself with the property surrounding that house?
When we talked about splitting the property, it was about the acreage,
Okay.
not about the house or the floor plan or any of those kinds of things.
Okay, so the acreage that you're talking about, do you have any recollection of how much acreage we're talking around that surrounds Chad's house?
You own it. How many acres is it?
Well, I appreciate it. I don't know. Judge, could we have a sidebar?
Yes. All right, thank you, counsel. We're back on the record. I had a sidebar with counsel regarding the last response from the witness, and I just want to instruct at this point, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the witness just provided what was essentially an unsolicited factual response in the case, and that answer has no relevance to the charges in this case or the guilt or innocence of the defendant. I'm going to instruct you to disregard that previous comment made by the witness, and on that fact, do not discuss that in any way in your deliberations or speculate about the previous answer. And I'll also instruct the witness to avoid mentioning that topic again. Mr. Pryor, with that in mind, then you can continue with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge. Now, you mentioned that Chad said that the kids are fine, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned that the truth will come out. Is that what you said? Something to that effect?
I didn't say the truth. He said that when things all come out, everybody will realize that everything will be fine.
Okay. So from that, did you glean that the children were alive?
I assumed yes.
Okay. And did Mr. Daybell at the time, did Chad at the time, when he told you that, was he sincere about when he told you that?
Yes.
And you've known him for a while, then that was true sincerity when he told you the kids are fine, right?
Objection calls for speculation.
Hold on, don't answer that. Sustain.
Okay. Now, you talked about the fact that there was some discussion, and please, oh, there we are. You talked about the discussion that it would generally be against your practice to do anything on a Sunday, correct?
I don't try to work on Sunday.
But then, for lack of a better word, from my perspective, that would be called like a Sabbath. Are you familiar with that term?
Yes.
But regardless of your faith and your beliefs, it's a day that you reserve for spending time with your family and doing things in that regard, church and family.
Yes.
Okay. And Chad was of the same faith as you are and had the same practice of Sunday was reserved for being at home with his family and practicing your faith and your commitment to your family. Would that be fair?
Everybody does that different.
Okay. And typically most folks in your faith would have some sort of a meal on a Friday or on a Sunday in the morning or in the evening. Is that true or is that not true?
That's subjective too.
Okay.
Everybody does that different.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Then you went to a discussion that in March of 2020 that there was some discussion about subdividing the property. Is that right?
Objection misstates the testimony.
Sustain.
You had some discussion about putting another modular home on the property. Is that right?
We had determined by then that that the county wouldn't let him split the property.
Okay.
But because there had been a single wide trailer on the property as well as the home and another septic system. And I had told him that the county would probably allow him to put another home on it, knowing that he would never be able to split that or sell that separately.
Okay, I see. So I misunderstood the facts a little bit. Thank you for clarifying. So in other words, there was some thought process initially into doing some sort of division of the property, and you folks determined that was not feasible. Is that fair?
That's correct.
So the only other option would be to use a then existing septic that was already on the property somewhere, correct?
No,
Okay, please tell me then.
because it had a septic system, the county would probably allow him to put another home on it, not necessarily that they would have to use that septic system.
Okay, all right. So there was an intent of March of 2020, from what I gather, for Mr. Daybell and his new wife to put a residence up for them to live in.
That's what he indicated.
Okay, so the intent was for them to stay for a while and then.
Objection calls for speculation.
Stain.
The intention was to put a mobile home up on the property for him and his wife. Is that right?
He had mentioned that that could have been one of the reasons.
Okay. Judge, I don't think I have anything else. Thank you.
All right, redirect.
Your Honor, I'm sorry to do this, but I'd ask for a brief sidebar. I think
Okay, why don't we do this? It's a good point for our mid-morning recess. Let's go ahead and take the recess. If the jurors are able to, because of our shortened day, maybe we can get the recess done in under 30 minutes, maybe 20 to 25 minutes for the recess if possible, and then we'll continue. I'll have the sidebar with counsel.
All right, please.
Your Honor, I think it might be a good idea for the.
Okay, Mr. Arnold, we'll have you retire to the vestibule there while we take up this evidentiary issue and take the matter up in your absence. Ben, Ms. Beatty.
And Your Honor, getting into this witness's intent, I think that having this witness testify about Mr. Daybell's intent and his sincerity and his rationale for putting this manufactured home on the property, I think the door has been opened to the fact that it is now Mr. Arnold's opinion as a realtor and as somebody familiar with what it takes putting a manufactured home on a property that Mr. Daybell's urgency in wanting to put that manufactured home on the property while Lori Vallow was incarcerated was due to the fact that doing an excavation would allow him to dispose of evidence. I warned Mr. Pryor about that this morning prior to the testimony of Mr. Arnold. I had no intent to get into that on direct, but it's my belief that the door has been opened.
Response, Mr. Pryor.
Judge, I don't believe the door has been opened in that. The difficulty is I'm allowed to inquire was the intent, because the initial testimony, if anybody opened the door, the state, when they said, well, they talked about Chad and Lori wanting to live in the house, and there was testimony about that. I'm allowed to inquire as to whether or not Chad and Lori were going to be allowed to live in the house, and that was their intent to live in the house. There's no intent to open any door, and there wasn't any opening of any door. And if you're going to allow a realtor to speculate, and obviously a hostile realtor to speculate about something like that, I think that's highly prejudicial, and the door has not been opened at this point.
I think the door has been opened at this point based on the cross, so I'll allow that, but I'll be careful, Ms. Beatty. It's got to remain within his personal knowledge, not speculation, of course. And I also am somewhat concerned about your witness going back with that factual assertion that's going to confuse the jurors. So be cautious if you're going into that territory, but I do think the motivation or intent was brought at issue in cross, so I think it is fair game for redirect. But boy, I want to be ready to try to shut things down if it starts to run off the rails on that previous issue as well. So that'll be the court's ruling. I'll permit limited questioning on that, so long as it goes to direct personal knowledge that this witness may have about the issue.
And Your Honor, if I may ask just a clarifying question to make sure I stay within the parameters of the court's ruling.
Yes.
My intent would simply be to ask the Realtor, based on his knowledge of, the process of putting a manufactured home on a piece of property, and based on what he has learned about the children being found on the property, does he now have a different opinion about why Mr. Daybell wished to have a manufactured home put on his property?
Well, so long as it's based on his personal opinion on facts that he knows and not just pure speculation, I'll see how the questioning goes, but I will permit a line of questioning on that.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. I appreciate it.
Okay, we'll take our break and then we'll try to come back on here 20 minutes at about 10:35.
All rise. The court's again in session.
Thank you. Please be seated. All right, we're back on the record. CR 2221-1623, State of Idaho versus Chad Guy Daybell. The jurors are not present. The court did just want to put something on the record here that we had a sidebar outside the presence of the jury and the witness and off the record regarding the response as it related to the witness saying that Mr. Pryor was an owner of property. The court determined in that sidebar that that was an irrelevant fact for purposes of the case and shouldn't be considered by the jury. I just wanted to make a record of what was said in that sidebar and would ask counsel for both the state and the defense to refrain from any further questioning that may elicit that, since the jury's been instructed to disregard it as anything to consider in deliberations in the case. So with that in mind, we're continuing with the cross-examination. I think we are starting with, I apologize, we're on redirect. Is that correct, Ms. Beatty? Okay, we'll continue with the redirect then. We can go ahead and have the jurors brought back in.
All right, please. Here's our president count for you, Art.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Or yesterday.
All right, we concluded our mid-morning recess. At this time, Mr. Arnold is on the stand, still under oath. And Ms. Beatty, you may proceed with redirect examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Arnold, we spoke about the weekend of September 21st, correct?
Correct,
And you spoke with Mr. Pryor about the weekend of the 21st, correct?
correct.
I just want to be clear for the record. Could it be that the 22nd of September was actually that Sunday of the weekend of the 21st?
Whatever day Sunday was that weekend is the day that we met at that property.
So it was the Sunday of that weekend.
Correct.
Thank you. And you mentioned that Mr. Daybell told you that he had guests in town that day, correct?
I'm not sure I was aware of that, other than that he had indicated that they were gonna be in town or around, but nothing specific about him having guests in town.
Okay, so did he make, I should ask this a different way. Did he make any representations to you about how long these folks were going to be in town?
No.
Okay,
Well,
you for clearing that up.
Correct. Sorry, that's not correct. He said they were going to be leaving and could only meet on that Sunday afternoon.
okay, thank you. Now, who contacted you about doing this showing of this piece of property?
Chad,
And you were asked about the financial position of David Warwick, who wanted to look at that piece of land.
I was.
As a realtor, do you run credit checks on people before you show them a piece of property or a house?
Sometimes, yes.
Is that something that you would do on a regular basis, though?
No,
Is it unusual that you didn't run a credit check on Mr. Warwick that Sunday?
no.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Pryor talked to you about the defendant's rationale for wanting to move a manufactured home onto his property in March of 2020, correct?
Yes.
Now, as a realtor, are you familiar with what the process of installing or placing a manufactured home on a piece of property is?
Not all realtors are.
Okay. But do you have an idea of what the generalities of what that would take?
Yes, I do know that. Yes.
Okay. And have you assisted other customers in obtaining manufactured homes and putting them on pieces of property?
Yes.
Now, can you kind of briefly describe what that process would entail?
There's a key word there, brief.
Okay.
I'll try to be brief.
How about as briefly as possible?
Well, you procure a manufactured home, you have to procure a piece of property to put it on, and then you have to do on-sites, meaning the foundation, you have to dig a foundation for footings and where how to put the structure so you can put the structure on it. You have to either hook up to city water, city sewer, or if you're in the country, you have to do a well and septic system.
And as a resident of the Salem area, you're aware of what was found on Mr. Daybell's property in June of 2020, correct?
Yes.
Based on your knowledge, well, let me backtrack a little bit. You were asked by the defense attorney about what you thought about Mr. Daybell's beliefs, or what you were asked what Mr. Daybell's beliefs or intentions were for putting a manufactured home on his property, correct?
Yes.
And that one of those reasons could be that he wanted to live there with his wife, Lori, when she got out of custody, correct?
Yes.
Based on what you know now, do you think that there may have been a different reason that he wanted to put a home on that property?
Yes.
I have no further questions for this witness.
All right. That didn't open the door for any further recross, so that will conclude the testimony of Mr. Arnold. Is he under subpoena by the state?
No, Your Honor, he can be released.
All right. From the defense?
Judge, he can be released.
Okay. Thank you for appearing and testifying. You may go ahead and step down, and that'll conclude your testimony.
Am I allowed to stay in the court?
If you'd like to, now that you're no longer going to be testifying, you may. All right, we'll have the state call another witness at this time then.
And Your Honor, the state calls Whitney Arnold.
solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, now that the witness is under oath, let me just inquire before examination begins. This trial has been live streamed as well as open to the public for view. Have you listened to or reviewed in any way any of the testimony that's taken place in the trial?
No, I have not.
Okay, have you discussed with anyone else their testimony that they've given in trial?
I have not.
Okay, thank you for your responses then. With that, Ms. Beatty, you can inquire on direct.
Thank you. Ma'am, could you please tell the jury your full name and then spell out your last name for Madam Court Reporter?
Sure. My name is Whitney Arnold. Arnold is A-R-N-O-L-D.
Mrs. Arnold, where do you live?
I live in Sugar City, Idaho.
Okay. And who are you married to?
Ron Arnold.
Do you know an individual named Chad Daybell?
Yes, I do.
Is he in the courtroom today?
Yes, he is.
Can you point to where he's sitting and what he's wearing?
He's here in a blue shirt with a plaid tie.
Okay. And were you familiar with an individual named Tammy Daybell?
Yes, I was.
How did you know Tammy Daybell?
Tammy and I were friends and acquaintances and collaborators. We knew each other in many different realms.
How did you meet Tammy Daybell?
I don't recall exactly. We lived in the same community and I lived within a couple of miles of her.
Did you attend church with the Daybells?
Yeah, we did.
Okay. I'd like to talk to you about October 19th of 2019.
Sure.
Did you get a call that morning?
Yes.
What was the nature of that call?
The phone call was from our clergy or bishop, and he just let us know. Ron took the phone call and just said, Tammy Daybell died.
Were you surprised?
I was shocked, actually.
What did you do after getting this phone call?
Ron and I decided that we'd go over and offer our condolences and see if there was anything we could do to help, and also maybe get some answers. It was very unexpected and pretty shocking. I think we were also looking for verification. Is this true? Could this have really happened?
Okay. And did you go over the Daybell residence that day?
We did.
Approximately what time was that?
I don't have an exact time, but before 9.
Okay. And did you make contact with anybody there?
Yeah, we did.
Do you remember who was there at the residence that morning?
Emma, Leah, Garth, Seth, Chad, and I can't recall if Michaela was there or not. Michaela is Seth's wife.
And Emma, Leah, Garth, and Seth, are those all Chad's children?
These are all Chad and Tammy's adult children, yes.
Okay. Did you talk to Chad?
I did talk to Chad that morning.
How would you describe his demeanor?
Maybe disconnected. I was expecting to see more emotion, but there wasn't a lot of emotion, which is not indicative of anything. Just grief experiences. It shows itself in many different ways.
Sure. Did you have a conversation with Mr. Daybell?
I did.
Did he indicate to you how Tammy had passed away or how she died?
He did not.
Did you have a conversation with him regarding an autopsy?
I did. After we had spoken with the kids for a while, there was, confusion and grief and a lot of sadness. And turning away from the kids, I asked Chad, have you considered an autopsy? Assuming the answer would be yes for such a young, vibrant woman. And his answer to me was no. So I pressed again, are you sure you don't want to do an autopsy? And then I turned and faced the children and Chad at the same time and said, don't you want to know? These girls carry the same DNA as their mother. Wouldn't you want to know if there's anything that can be prevented in the future? And he said no, very calmly. And we felt like the emergency responders that was here to take Tammy's body away had a pretty good idea of how she died.
Okay. At some time after the 19th of October, did you learn whether Chad had remarried?
Yes, I did learn that Chad had remarried.
When did you learn that Chad had remarried?
It was within a couple of days of him actually getting married.
And when was that?
I found out on a Sunday.
Do you remember what month that was in?
November.
Okay. Did you ever have the opportunity to meet Chad's new wife?
I did.
How did that come about?
Since Tammy had died, we had been inviting Chad and Tammy's children over to our home for dinner. And our intent was to offer them a place to grieve, a place to have a little reprieve, to be nurtured. And that had become kind of our habit, or not habit, but it had become more familiar to us, inviting them over every Monday night. And Chad came back in town, which we were made aware of. And so we asked for, or Ron had initiated contact with Chad and let me know that Chad and his new wife would be coming to our home that night with the children for dinner.
And did they come to your home that night?
They did come to our home that evening.
And did you have a conversation with them?
Yes, not with Chad specifically. I was understandably disappointed and frustrated.
Why were you frustrated?
I felt like emotionally that was not fair to the kids as they were grieving their mother. And yeah, it just felt, I was at odds with him within myself. And I never verbalized to him, just recognizing maybe where he was at in his own grieving process.
Judge, and just as an inquiry, could we have some foundation as to when this this meal took place?
And when did this meal take place?
I can't give a specific date, but it was a Monday night
In November?
in November,
Would that be 2019?
2019, before Thanksgiving and after probably the 1st of November.
Okay.
That's as close as I can get.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Pryor. Did you speak with Lori that night that they were at your house for dinner?
We did.
And
I did have some conversation with her.
And when you spoke with Lori, was Chad present?
Yes, Chad was present.
Did you have the opportunity to ask Lori about whether or not she has children?
Yeah, just part of casual conversation, asking her the questions. Where are you from? Where did you grow up? Do you have children? And to which her answer was, yes, I have 7 children.
Did she tell you whether or not she still had children at home?
Actually, that was a specific question, and she said all of our children are out of the home.
Okay. And when she said she had 7 children, did you understand that to mean that she had 7 children, or did you understand that to mean she was referring to her children and Chad's children?
I was unclear on that.
Okay. Your Honor, if I may have just a moment.
You may.
And I have no additional questions for this witness, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Cross-examination.
No questions, Judge.
Okay, well, that will conclude your testimony then. I would presume she's released from any subpoena from the state. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
The defense does not intend to call her back.
Okay, you may go ahead and be excused. Thank you for appearing and testifying this morning. All right, the state may call its next witness.
State would call Craig Huff, Your Honor.
Solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, this witness is now under oath, so I have a few questions for the witness before we start with examination. Mr. Huff, this trial has been broadcast, live streamed as well as open to the public. Have you observed any testimony or any part of the trial since it started?
No,
Okay, and have you discussed with anyone else the testimony they've given in trial?
no.
Okay, thanks for your answers. Ms. Beatty, you can inquire on direct.
Sir, could you please state your full name for the jury and then spell your last name?
Craig Dennis Huff, Huff.
Thank you, sir. Where do you live?
I live in Springville, Utah.
And are you familiar with an individual named Chad Daybell?
I am.
How do you know Chad Daybell?
Chad was in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint ward that I was in for a number of years.
Okay. And would you describe yourself more as friends with Mr. Daybell or acquaintances with Mr. Daybell?
I would say friends.
Okay.
From acquaintances to friends. So
And did Mr. Daybell move out of Springville at some point?
he did.
Do you remember when that was?
It seems like it was about 2015, thereabouts.
And did you maintain contact with Mr. Daybell after he moved away from Springville, Utah?
I did.
In 2019, did something happen to Mr. Daybell's family?
From what I've seen in the paper and everything is,
Actually, let me rephrase that question. Did Tammy Daybell pass away at some point? to your
Yes.
knowledge? Okay. And I should have asked a better question there. Do you recall when that was?
in my recollection, it was in October of 2019.
Did you attend a memorial service for Tammy Daybell?
I did.
Where was that memorial service held?
It was held in the LDS church in Springville, Utah,
9th East and 2nd North. So
Do you remember what date that was?
I know I think it was a Monday. I don't remember the exact date.
And would that have been in October of 2019?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes.
At the memorial service for Tammy Daybell, did you have a conversation with Chad Daybell?
I did. During the visitation or the viewing part of it, I had a conversation with Chad specifically at that time.
Did he say anything to you, or did you discuss the way or reason that Tammy had passed away?
As I was going through the line, Chad and I have been very close. And when I got to him, he broke down crying. I broke down crying. We hugged each other, and he said something to the effect, she choked to death, and that's how she died. So.
Did Chad say anything else to you about things that happened around the time that Tammy died?
I can't remember whether there's specifically things he said. There are a lot of things that have been said over the years.
Sure. Can I ask you, let me ask you a little bit of a different question.
Okay.
Just to make sure that we don't get into any hearsay. Did you and Chad have a conversation about passwords?
We did.
Can you describe that conversation?
It took place, my recollection, it took place the Saturday after the funeral in Rexburg itself. I had children that lived in Rexburg, and we had made arrangements to have lunch with Chad. And so we met at the Hickory restaurant, and we went in and we had we were sitting there, and he talked about one of the miracles that had happened. And that was that shortly before, a week or so before Tammy passed away, that he found out or got all of the passwords that he had never been able to have before. Not that she didn't let him, he just was never part of knowing what the passwords were for their bank, for their computers, for those kind of things. And he said that just one of those miracles that happened. That now I got all the passwords before she passed away.
And he had gotten those passwords from Tammy.
I can't say that specifically, but he said that he
Obtained
those passwords. I can't remember whether he said Tammy gave them to me or what. I don't recall that.
And was he specific on how soon before her death that happened?
It seemed like it was a week before. Again, I can't say specifically that it was but that's my recollection, is that it was a week before.
And that's what he was characterizing as a miracle?
Yes, because he'd never had them in the past.
Okay.
So.
I may have just a moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
And I have no additional questions for this witness. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Pryor, cross-examination.
Good morning.
You described that you and Chad are friends, good friends.
Yes.
In fact, when he moved from Springville to Rexburg, do you recall what year that was?
I think it was 2015.
Right. You continued that friendship and came to visit him somewhat regularly, correct?
We did. When we were in Idaho to visit our children in Rexburg, we stopped in and saw him and Tammy.
Now, I'm looking at a phrase that says bishopric secretary.
He is, when I was called as a bishop in my LDS ward,
Okay.
he was called as, I asked for him to be my executive secretary, which is, he would take care of all of my appointments, would be there when people were there. So we had two people present all the time. And he was very much a part of serving in the bishopric of the local congregation for me.
And in that regard, the two people who share that responsibility, being a bishop in a LDS faith is a high honor.
I would say I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I would
It's one where you're responsible for a local congregation. And I said, yeah, so yes.
Okay.
So,
And the relationship between the bishop of the ward and the bishopric, and I'm going to kill that word, bishopric secretary, that needs
the
to be.
executive secretary. So,
Executive, thank you.
Okay.
Then I don't have to say that anymore.
so yeah, okay.
The executive secretary, that's a significant relationship that has to occur, right?
It is. Yes.
And you're familiar with all of Chad's children, correct?
Very much. Yes.
You were aware about Mark going off on his mission, and you've spoken to Chad about that,
Yep. Yes.
about Emma, Leah, Seth. I'm forgetting one,
Garth.
Garth, thank you.
Yes.
And when you're describing Chad's personality, since you know him so well, how would you describe him?
When I was associating with him when he was down in Springville, it was wonderful. I mean, he served in the Scouts with my children. He was very much involved in the local congregation. He was very much involved, a wonderful person. So,
Okay. And in terms of personality traits, how would you describe those personality traits?
It's sort of hard to differentiate the church side of it and the just the direct relationship. I think he was very driven with his writing. He was very driven with wanting to do things that would make sense to people. I know that he loved the writing. He loved being with the youth. He loved being with people. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing that stands out to me.
And if you were to pick between someone who is humble or someone who's maybe a little ostentatious, which one would Chad better fit?
When we were down there, I
I'm
would
going
say
to object on relevance here.
Overruled.
when I knew Chad down there, I would say that he was fairly humble. So,
Okay. Servant of the church,
yes,
someone who was wanting to serve in the capacity in your faith in a strong way.
yes.
Okay. Now, you talked about the passwords a little bit. You had been over to Chad's house a number of times, right?
I had.
And you were actually relatively close to Tammy as well, right?
Yes.
Were you aware that it was Tammy who did the finances and the organization of the company that they were running?
Yes.
And it was Tammy who was basically the driving force between running the publishing company, right?
I know that from a finance standpoint that Tammy was the one that was very much involved.
Right.
And so,
And Chad was the, would it be fair to say that Chad was the artistic side? He was the one who wrote the books.
yes,
He was very passionate about a variety of different theories in his books, right?
that's correct.
And if you were to categorize Chad's books, would you say fiction or nonfiction?
Well, I would say they are nonfiction. I'll say it from he at the beginning of his books, he always said it was this is my opinions. This is nonfiction. He never presented the ones that I read of his as being fact. So,
Okay. And he enjoyed the passion of expression. Would that be fair?
yes,
And you would say that he, as an artist, he would elaborate, and he always liked the process of elaborating and discussing in a wide lens different theories and ideas, right?
yeah, they were his theories that different than what some of the things that I thought, but yes,
But we can all agree that it's everybody has different theories and ideas, especially when it comes to religion, right?
correct.
So, if Tammy was running the finances, was she the one was she solely responsible for the finances to your knowledge?
I don't know, to my knowledge.
Okay. But you do know that she was the one holding the purse book.
I know that Tammy, when a check was written, Tammy wrote the check.
Okay. So to discuss the idea of finances, that was a burden that was going to be placed upon Chad on the passing of Tammy. Would that be fair?
It would be.
Okay. And you mentioned when you were visiting with Chad, that there was some expression of grief at the time of the memorial by Chad?
In the viewing, yes, very much.
And anything that he said to you, did you find that his expression of grief at that time was genuine?
Yes,
So you didn't have any perception that he was faking it or trying to pretend to be grief stricken about the loss of his wife. Is that right?
during the viewing, no, I did not.
And
So,
and again, you've known him for a long time.
yes,
That relationship was so close that you were, as part of your commitment to your religion and your faith, you were going to appoint him and have him work as the person closest to you to conduct your role as the bishop, right?
correct.
So you'd be a pretty good person to judge whether someone's faking it about grief or not faking it about grief. Would that be fair?
I don't know that I could say I'm a pretty good person. What I felt was genuine when
Okay.
with his.
And in knowing Chad for a significant period of time, you truly felt that he was expressing a genuine grief about the loss of his wife. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I have nothing else, Judge. Thank you.
All right. All right, redirect.
Mr. Huff, you were asked about your beliefs regarding Chad's sincerity of emotion
Yes.
after the passing of his wife.
Yes.
Did you learn at some time after Tammy's passing that Chad had remarried?
Yes.
Were you surprised by that?
I was shocked by that.
And you had a conversation with Chad in that immediate aftermath where he described it as a miracle that he had obtained all of Tammy's passwords to the financial information about a week before she died.
That's
correct.
That's correct.
Based on that conversation and on Chad's subsequent remarriage and your history with him, do you still believe that his emotions were sincere at the time?
That's a hard question because I've loved Chad as a friend and want to feel that they were sincere. But there's always those questions that you have that were they sincere? Were they not sincere? And so that's one of those challenging ones. That question's hard to answer.
That's fine, sir.
So
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. That will conclude then the testimony of Mr. Huff. And I believe he comes in as subpoenaed by the state. Is he released from the subpoena at this time, Ms. Beatty?
Yes, Your Honor.
He's released from the defense as well. He don't need to come back.
okay, thanks.
All right, Mr. Huff, thank you for testifying. You can go ahead and step down from the witness stand. I have a quick sidebar with counsel just to discuss scheduling, please. All right, thank you. The state can go ahead and call its next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would call Principal Rich Garner.
I swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, now that the witness has been sworn, I have a few questions before direct begins. Mr. Garner, this trial has been live streamed as well as open to the public. Have you observed or watched in any way any of the trial testimony since the case started?
No,
Okay, have you discussed with anyone else the testimony they've provided in trial?
no.
Okay, thanks for your responses. Mr. Wixom, you can inquire on direct.
Sorry, Principal Garner, can you please state and spell your first and last name for the record?
My name is Richard Garner, Richard, Garner, Garner.
Thank you. And where do you live?
I live in Rexburg, Idaho.
Where do you work?
I work at Central Elementary School in Sugar City, Idaho.
And you're the principal there?
Yeah.
How long have you worked there?
I've been at Central for about, this is the end of my 6th year in that building in our district.
Where did you work prior to that?
I was at a building right, 200 yards away, Kershaw Intermediate, for 22 years before that.
Excuse me. Do you recall working with Tammy Daybell?
Yes.
Right. I want to draw your attention back to the summer and fall of 2019. First, can you explain to the jury what was Tammy's job at the school?
She was our librarian. That was her main job. That was like on her contract. That was her main focus. But she also expanded that. She would do the usual librarian things with checking out books, reading stories to the little kids. It was kindergarten through 3rd grade. So she was working with them, but she also developed and helped us organize our computer lab. I asked her to help to make that better, and she was good with computers. So she was developing our computer lab and showing them basic skills and internet safety and those kind of things. And then she volunteered, she covered some lunchroom duties, outside duties. And then in the lunchroom, she offered to check the kids in for lunch and take the count for the lunch count on her lunch break.
So is it fair to say she did a lot of things that she hadn't been originally hired for?
Yes, she was covering a lot of things.
Were there ever things that she volunteered to do at the school?
Yes, all the time she would just help out wherever she could.
Did you ever have her build a website for the school?
No, she made a little web page for the kids when they went into the lab to click on it and be able to go into the programs they used, and just she built that just kind of her own as part of the computer lab.
Did she ever do anything with respect to the library windows and curtains?
Yes, well, she's always looking ways to help out and improve. And I just remember one time she came in, she said, "I need to get your approval for something." And I wondered what that would be. And she walked me down to the computer lab and the library. She's like, "I made these curtains for the lab. I hope it's okay. Kids are peeking in during recess, they're peeking in and interrupting the kids when they're trying to study and read, and I'm trying to help them. And so I made these curtains. Can I hang them up? Is that okay with you?" So she would do things like that.
Based on your perceptions of Tammy, was she someone who was well liked at the school?
Yes, she was always helping everybody, and she interacted with all the faculty because she would take their students at library, and that was their preparation time. So she would interact with all the teachers, and at duties, she would interact with teachers and other members of our faculty and staff. So yeah, and I never heard anyone say anything bad ever about Tammy.
I want to ask you some questions about observations that you may have had about Tammy's activity or health. First, let's start. Can you describe for the jury the layout of your school?
Well, it's older. It is what it is. It's an older little school in a little town. It's got 3 wings to it. It's kind of shaped like a T. And so the library was kind of down on one wing toward the middle end, and then the lab that we were developing was down and around and on the end of another wing.
So when Tammy would go back and forth between the lab and the library, how far did she have to walk to do that?
All the teachers would bring their students to the library to start out because they didn't know for sure what she'd have them do. So she would usually read them a story, check the books in and let them check out books, do a little activity. And then sometimes she would take them down. Sure. She would check them in at the library and then do whatever activity or read them a story. And then if she had thought of it with an activity with the computer lab, she would walk them down the hall and then down the end of the other hall, probably 50 yards from, back and forth. And then she'd walk them back and the teachers would pick them up or she'd walk them back to the classroom.
How frequently would you observe her moving around at the school?
All day long from the start of the first class, because she would be getting a class and then walking them back and forth, getting another class, and then she would go out to recess duty, stop by the office to pick up a radio to take out for recess duty. Then she would go in and do the lunch count, pick up things for the lunch count, and then start back up with classes. So she was busy all day. I guess the only time I saw her sitting was when she was doing lunch count.
And was lunch count an assigned duty or something she volunteered for?
It's not something people want to do, and we don't really have money for it. You get a free lunch if you do lunch count, and she was willing to do that, get a little free lunch on her break and use up her time to do that.
Based on your observations of watching Tammy and her activity at school, did you ever observe anything that would have caused you to identify whether or not she might have had a health concern?
No.
Based on your observation, did she appear to be healthy?
Yeah, she was just really active, energetic, happy all day.
Did you ever notice any changes to her weight, either up or down?
I don't recall any significant change in any way.
While Tammy was working at the school, do you recall, was she someone who took sick days?
No, she was very reliable. Usually, as an administrator, you kind of know the people that have a lot of sick days or are often gone because it's very difficult to get substitute teachers. It's a really hard spot to fill. Kind of everybody in public ed knows bus drivers and substitute teachers. They're very valuable, but it's very hard to fill, to get people to fill those positions. And so people that require that a lot because it's in your mind, because it's hard. Every day that happens, it's like, oh, how in the world are we going to cover that? So someone that you're never having to do that, it comes to your mind, those that need that often. And I don't recall her ever needing that.
Yeah. So is it fair you don't remember her to have any sick days?
I don't recall any sick days.
Did you ever come to know anything about Tammy's activity level when she's not at the school?
Well, I would hear at the end of the day as teachers were leaving and, closing down the day.
Response, Mr. Wixom?
I can just ask a different question.
Go ahead.
Based upon your personal knowledge, things that you observed, did you ever observe her in any activities outside of the school?
Well, I saw her getting her car going to Zumba with other teachers or her daughter, and then they were heading to other classes or things. And then I did see her at a road race, a running race.
Can you first identify when you saw her there and where, and then will you tell the jury about that experience?
Sure. It was a Saturday morning, September 7th, and we're out working in my yard, and we lived 2019.
Go ahead.
Out working in the yard. It was an early morning, and our house is about 1 block from a park. And so whenever there's a race or an event, we can hear the music. So we heard music playing a morning of September 7th. And I wondered what it would be. A good friend of ours has the timing business for most of the road races in that area. So I asked my wife, do you want to ride bikes or do you want to go over and say hi to our friend that runs the timing business? Perhaps he would be there. So we rode our bikes over and saw that it was his timing business. And we walked over. He was not there, but others. So we just visited with people we knew. And I remember just finishing that up and turning to look, and Tammy and her daughter, Emma, were crossing the finish line. And I went, oh, I'll go say hi to Tammy and Emma, just like you would with colleagues and normally. And so I went over and talked to them.
And let me back up in case I missed it. What kind of a race was this?
Oh, it had a variety of distances, but I believe they ran the 5K.
And when you went over to talk to Tammy, what did you observe about her physical condition at the end of the race?
She just looked like someone who ran a 5K. And she was just Tammy. She's like, I said, hey, good morning. You did it. Oh, it's good to see you guys. I didn't know you were be running. And she said, oh, yeah, we're here to support Joe. That was Emma's husband, and he had been sponsoring the race. It was raising money for a charity. So they wanted to support him. So she and Emma ran the race, and we just chatted for a moment. They just were catching their breath and sipping waters and just like normal people that are finishing a race, and then said goodbye, and then we went home.
So based on your observation of her at the end of the race, was there any reason for you to think that she wasn't healthy based upon her completing this race?
No, I've seen a lot of people finish races. I've coached a lot of cross country and track, and actually helped time some of those events at those races. And I've seen people finish and what different ways that they finish. And there was not any concern I had for them. They seemed totally fine.
How did you first learn of Tammy? Well, let me withdraw that. At some point, did you learn that Tammy Daybell had passed?
I did.
How did you learn about that?
On October 19th, 2019, I got a text early in the morning, earlier than usual on a Saturday morning, and it was from a former coworker. And it kind of surprised me because I hadn't heard from them for a while. And she did have a second grader in our building, so it wasn't totally unusual that she would text me, but I got a text in that morning and it said, we lost Tammy.
How did you react to that?
It was puzzling because I'm like, why am I hearing from her? And we lost Tammy. I didn't know what that quite meant. And my first thought actually was, oh no, she's taking a job somewhere else. That was my first reaction in my mind. And how are we going to ever replace her and everything she covers? And then I thought, well, maybe she means she's not going to be here this week, because she had been talking about her mother and her mom was having some struggles. So I thought, oh, maybe we lost Tammy for this week. And no, how are we going to, who could cover the library for the week? Well, that was my initial thoughts. So I called her up and I asked her about it. And then I found out that it was much more serious than that Tammy had passed.
May I ask, who did you call up?
I called up the person that texted me.
And that's when you learned that she'd actually passed away.
Yes, she lived near her, the person that texted me into, and she was involved in a part of their congregation at church. So she had found out very early because they had been contacted for helping the family with that she had passed away. So she was kind of emotional, and she realized, oh, I would need to know, because she had been a teacher. So she realized, oh, I better let Mr. Garner know, because it's going to affect a lot of people, and her son and everybody at the school. So I better let him know that Tammy had passed away.
What was your reaction when you learned that she had actually passed away?
I was just shocked. I was stunned.
Why?
Well, I thought she must have been in a car accident or something had happened, because I don't know why she would pass away. So it was just really shocking.
What did you do when you learned that information?
Just gathered myself together, kind of. You got, try to figure out a game plan. Realized, man, I need to reach out to Emma, because she was also worked at our building. That was going to be a huge deal to Emma. to lose her mom because they were so close. And how we could help out and what we could do to get through this next week and the rest of the school year. At this point, it was a big deal.
Are you saying these are the things that were going through your
Yes,
mind?
yes.
So what did you do next? Once you'd thought about Emma, what did you do?
I realized, well, I want to reach out to Emma, her daughter, and other employee, like I would any employee. I was concerned about her. And so I asked my wife if she'd go with me. Said, will you, go out with me? I want to visit with her, make sure she's okay, see what we can do to help. Maybe try to get an idea of the schedule they have, or if they've had any idea what could be done, to help them out or get ready for what was coming up with our logistics for the next while.
So did you go to the Daybell home?
We did. Yeah, my wife and I.
Who did you first see and make contact with?
That's pretty vivid. I remember knocking on the screen door and it opening, and Emma opened the door and she just took a little small step down to where I was and just collapsed onto my shoulder and just fell onto my shoulder.
Without speaking to anything she said, what observation did you make about her emotional state?
She just was weeping on my shoulder. And I mean, I felt for her, but I was a little awkward because my wife's standing there and she's an employee and I'm a guy. And in education, elementary especially, you always have to be mindful of your interactions. And so I could tell she was very distraught, and I just held her there. And I looked over at my wife and she just kind of smiled, and she was just on my shoulder for about a whole minute. And then finally she asked us do you want to come in? And we stepped back into the house.
At the house, did you ever have any contact with Chad at that point?
Yes.
And first of all, can you explain to the jury what were your observations about Chad's demeanor and emotional state when you got there?
So we stepped in the house and Emma sat down to the side on my left and talked again for a little moment. How are you doing? Are you going to be, whatever time you need to take off, we'll understand, we'll help you. Visited for a moment. Then my wife stepped forward and was visiting with her. And that gave me a chance. I kind of scanned the room at that point to see who else is there and saw some of the other children. But I really only knew Emma at that point. So I knew they were the children, but I didn't know names or anything. And then I scanned that. I saw Chad behind me to the right, kind of just back behind. I didn't know he was right there. He was just standing right there.
And how was he behaving?
He was just standing there.
Did you have a conversation with him?
I did. I reached out, offered my condolences, asked what we could do to help. You were trying to be empathetic and sympathetic to the situation, but also I was hoping to know if they had a plan. I asked about how things were going, and it came up that Tammy was gone. She was in Springville, and that I asked kind of, well, what is your plan? Do you have a plan yet? I know it's early. He didn't really say a lot and I just put it in my mind, I was putting it that he was probably in shock or really tired, exhausted from us, the night and everything that went on. So.
Why were you concerned about whether he had a plan at that point?
Well, I wanted to be kind to them and off that, but also if I wanted to know when the funeral might be, what they had in mind, what their thoughts were, because like I said earlier, it's difficult to staff a school. And so many people like Tammy, I knew that everybody would want to go to the funeral. And so I was like, how can we do that? If it's going to be like on Saturday, it's no big deal. That'd be great. If it was on Friday afternoon or something, everybody can just go. And then when he said that it was going to be Tuesday, you want to be gracious. But I was like, Tuesday and in Springville? I said, what are you doing here? What are we doing in Sugar City so that we can all attend? And we all adored her. We loved her. And I want him to realize that we all cared about Tammy, and your wife was loved. And we we want to be here. I know that most everybody that works in our building wants to go and honor her. And so it was obvious that it was going to be Tuesday for a funeral in Utah, and that was it. And I just thought, with trying to be polite because of the situation, just like, then my mind's racing. We had 20 teachers, and I know most of them, and myself, I should go there. I should be there. How do we all go to Springville, Utah, 4.5 hours away, and get back and cover 400 students and everything else of the school? So I asked, is there any way we could have a memorial or do something here? Because we're all going to want to come and do something for Tammy. Is it only going to be the Tuesday funeral?
What was his reaction?
He said, I don't want to inconvenience or put anybody out.
Did you have occasion to explain to him some of the concerns with the logistics in the school?
A little bit, but I didn't want to come across that, oh, it's just about us being convenienced, and at the school. But I shared that it would be a lot easier if we could have something at a time where so many of us could attend.
And in that conversation, when you pressed him more, did he ever agree to arrange a memorial?
He said, well, possibly we could do something, and we agreed that he was going to check, and then we would talk later to see if we could work something out.
And did you later talk to him more about this?
Yeah, so then we left, and my wife and I went over to the school, and well, I went to another coworker to kind of say to them, did you hear what happened? Can you give me some ideas? These are possibilities. She was
The same.
so I visited with a
So hold
coworker.
on. We got to wait for a new question here. I sustain an objection. Go ahead.
So Principal Garner, just isolating it to conversation that you had with Chad, just explain to the jury what plans were eventually made.
So later, my wife and I were at the school. I was finishing up a painting project, and he called, and I had it on speaker because I had a roller in one hand, and I was painting. And so we were just talking it through, and we came up with an idea and that it would work out to have a memorial service for Tammy on Wednesday at 1:00. That way the family could have the funeral in Utah on Tuesday and then drive back the morning of Wednesday. And then it took quite a bit because the superintendent had to approve this and the school board had to vote to close school. So I explained that to him. I'd have to get all permission to do all these things so everybody could attend, but we closed just our school out of the whole district. We just closed our school, and we had a memorial service for her at 1:00 on Wednesday.
Had you proposed the idea to him to maybe even do something in the evening on Wednesday or another day?
Well, I don't recall all the details of what we worked out.
Ultimately, who made the plans for the agenda or arrangement for the actual memorial service?
Right before it was, I don't know exactly when, but I received a text, and it was a text for the service of who would speak and the songs and those kind of things that had to be pretty close to Wednesday because I had to go. Nobody was around to do that. They asked me to help out, and I said, do you have a program or anything? And they said, we haven't planned on.
All right, Mr. Ricks, I'm going to ask for the witness to clarify, please.
Certainly. You're being asked to explain the context of this particular conversation. Who was it with and when was it?
I got a text, and it said the list for the program.
I can ask an additional.
Go ahead, Mr. Wixom.
Thank you. Who sent this text you're talking about?
I don't know. I believe it was Emma. Sent me a text listing the program.
Ultimately, did you learn what the plan was for the memorial?
Yes.
And was there anything that you believed was unusual about that?
Well, I was surprised that we were doing the whole thing, kind of. They asked if I could arrange it. So I contacted the bishop of their congregation and arranged a time and for the church to be opened. And I had run Wednesday morning and get the program. We made a little program for the memorial.
As far as you understood, was there any help you got from Chad on those kinds of logistics for the memorial service?
No.
You know, I may have just a moment, please.
You may.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this time, the state has no further questions.
All right, thank you. Mr. Pryor, you can cross.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Would you prefer that I refer to you as principal or Mr. Garner? What would be your preference?
Mr. Garner's fine.
Thank you. So, Mr. Garner, I saw through the records that you were interviewed by Officer Mattingly. Is that right?
That's correct.
Do you remember when that interview took place?
It was in May of 2020.
Judge, I'm sorry. I'm trying to, if I could just have a moment, Judge.
Yes.
Okay. And I noticed that in the interview, you used an expression when you were discussing Emma and Tammy's relationship. Do you recall what that expression is you used?
I don't know the exact word.
If I were to suggest to you that you said Emma and Tammy were thick and tight, would you explain to me what you meant by that?
They were mother and daughter and colleagues at work and friends.
Well, thick and tight, they're mother and daughter, but it was more than that, wasn't it? They were exceptionally close, correct?
They were very close.
They worked at the same school together. During any free time, they tended to spend most of their time together. Would that be fair?
Yes.
But now you spoke about Tammy and what you observed, but you also told Officer Mattingly that you didn't know anything about Tammy outside of school, correct?
Well, I was talking about they went to Zumba.
Well, that's not what
And
I'm
those-
talking about.
Okay.
I'm talking about in terms of her home life, what was going on with her family at home. You don't know anything about that, right?
I was not very aware of her
Okay.
family.
What you were aware is what was going on at the school and the fact that on a couple of occasions you may have observed her going to a Zumba class, right?
Correct?
Okay. Now, in terms of the 5K race that you referenced, you mentioned that Joe was the sponsor of that race, or was the promoter? Which was it?
Organizer, promoter.
Organizer.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Tammy mentioned to you that they were there to support Joe as part of the organizer of this event, correct?
Yes, they,
And would it be fair to say that Joe would know, who ran in the race or who participated in the race?
yes,
Okay. And you saw Tammy at the finish line, is that right?
yes, I saw them cross the finish line.
Okay. Okay. So in other words, you actually saw Tammy running. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
Okay. Now with this knowledge that Emma and Tammy were so close, Emma's grief in this situation was very genuine. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And you mentioned that you thought, and I don't want to put words or cause an objection, but when you said that Chad was there, did you think that was shock or he was just being stoic?
I believe I used the word stoic.
Okay. Trying to be strong. Is that fair?
I don't know. I put it to, he could have been exhausted. He could have been in shock. He could
Okay.
have been strong. I don't know.
Now, were you aware of where Tammy grew up and where her family roots originated?
I knew she was from Springville.
Okay. So did you find it unusual that they would have a funeral in the place where she was raised and her family roots? Would you find that somewhat unusual?
No.
Okay. So this idea that you wanted people to, from your school to celebrate at the memorial, you approached Chad with that idea, correct?
Yes, we were wanting to be able to honor her.
Right. And you would agree that she was a reliable worker at work and someone that could be counted on at work.
Yes.
She's one of these people that whether she was sick or not, she would come to work and she would work and not really let on that she may not have been feeling well. That's consistent with her character.
Objection, Your Honor. The attorney is testifying.
Sustained.
Would it be consistent with her character to show up to work and put on a strong face? Would that be something you wouldn't something that you would expect from someone like Tammy?
Possibly.
Okay. You mentioned, Officer Mattingly, that Tammy was with the school district for 4 or 5 years. Is that what you said?
That's what I said at the time.
Okay. And Tammy was actually with your school she was just starting her 2nd year. Is that right?
I was the start of my 2nd year working at the school. So my time working with her.
Right. And it was her start of her 2nd year as well, correct?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And at the start of your 2nd year, that's when the insurance, as far as getting insurance and insurance kicking in, would start. You'd be eligible for that bump on the insurance once you start your 2nd year. Is that right?
Objection outside of scope, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Okay. Judge, I think that's all I have.
Any redirect?
Judge, could I inquire as to where the redirect would come from?
Well, let me first see if there is going to be redirect, Mr. Wixon.
I might have just a couple of questions, Your Honor.
Go ahead. I'll permit it.
Principal Garner, is it safe to say that you're being asked to recall things from 5 years ago?
Yes.
Is it safe to say that could impact some of your memory on some details?
Yes.
Are you confident that you worked with Tammy for 1.5 years, regardless of how long she worked at the school?
Yes.
Is there any, let me throw that. I can't remember if you explained, but did you happen to see the son-in-law, Joe, at the 5K?
Overruled.
You may answer.
Did I see? Could you restate?
Sure. Did you see Joe at the 5K?
I did.
Any question that you're not confusing that event with another event?
No. I just went over and spoke to him because he was over by the timing van and I had already gone over there to check to see if my friend that owns the timing business was there. So I'm like, hey, Joe, how are you? Oh, I didn't know we had a conversation and then I talked to other people. Then I turned and saw Emma and Tammy.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no more questions.
Okay. That will conclude the testimony then of Mr. Garner. Is he still under any subpoena from the state for potential recall?
He is, Your Honor.
All right, well then, Principal Garner, as you're excused today, I'll note that there's an order in this case prohibiting witnesses from observing testimony, so the state can further discuss that if they intend to recall you, but you would not be permitted to view further testimony, or you may be excluded from future testimony if you're watching what others have testified to in the case. So with that in mind, then that will conclude the testimony of this witness. And you can go ahead and step down. Thank you for your testimony. All right. From the prosecution, then I understand the state's requesting that we break for today. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor. I think as we indicated yesterday, our next witness had been a little lengthier of a witness. And so I think today would be a good stopping point to come in fresh on Monday.
All right. We had discussed that schedule, so we are going to conclude for the day. We'll begin again with testimony on Monday morning. For the weekend, then, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please continue to abide by the court's instruction to not do anything to research this case. Don't look up the case or any of the trial, what's being publicized or reported in the media. Don't discuss the facts of the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. You're not permitted to do that until your deliberations begin. And we appreciate you continuing to follow that instruction each day. So we'll now be in recess until Monday morning. We'll intend to begin the testimony again at the regular time and schedule on Monday with evidence starting at 8:30. So unless either side has anything further, we'll recess for the weekend.
Nothing
Further
further.
from,
Sorry,
nothing further from the stay either.
nothing from the defense.
Okay, thank you, counsel. We're in recess.
All right, please.
Okay. Well, I'll look at the lands and I'll probably, if I think there's any issues, we look at any issues. They're gonna call him 3 or 4 hours.